Welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a financial mediator and business valuation expert in St. Louis, Missouri. Today, we're speaking with Alex Prasad, who is located in Michigan, and he's actually an entrepreneur and a business attorney. And with a decade of experience in early stage companies and M&A law, we thought that a good conversation today would be talking about M&A transactions, deals, and kind of what creates a deal maker or a deal breaker. And it's going to be a casual conversation because when we prepped for this call, we have a lot of stories to tell you. So, welcome, Alex. We're kind of going to be talking about some fun things today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. This is, there's lots of good stories. We already told a couple.
It's lots of good stories. Like when you're looking at M&A, I think it is difficult to have a fun conversation about it because every industry is so specific. Everybody just wants to know, like, what are the multiples? What are the valuation multiples? What's
Right.
my EBITDA multiple? Is it 5 times? Is it 3 times? Things like that. When in the reality is like part of the negotiation of the deal is the price, right? Part of it is
Right.
the valuation. But for the most part, that's not what's going to make or break the deal. We're going to have all these other financial issues, or even most of the time, it's sort of like after we've negotiated the price. So we've negotiated the price and we've all been in our best, attitudes and speaking in all of our best ways and putting all of our financials in this beautiful way forward. But like, what is at least one of the things that you think could be a huge deal breaker and people have no clue about it?
Well, I mean, I think you could pick particular, items. I mean, like working capital, right? Everyone says, yeah, working capital. Sure, we'll put that number in the LOI, no problem. Then you realize this is one of the few binary things, like dollars in your pocket, buyer, seller, and vice versa. And it gets contentious fast. But just my blanket advice always, doesn't matter what side of the transaction you're on, is you have to make the counterparty your best friend. Because everyone thinks they run a tight ship. I had a client once tell me, I think we run a pretty tight ship. I'm like, oh, look, I'm here to tell you that all 28 of your trademarks, have expired. So we should probably fix that before we complete the sale process, right? We laughed about it because we got it closed off and no problem. But there will be curveballs. There is no deal that is smooth. None. Zero. And in fact, if it's going smoothly, all the people who are repeat actors like myself, my team, yourself go, what's going to go wrong? What's going to go wrong? Because something will go wrong. Like you will not rest until you find the wrong thing or the curveball. So there's two things that happen if something goes wrong, right? Diligence discovers something. Doesn't matter what the thing is. Something was misstated in the financials and whoa, that affects the valuation. Nothing to fear. Two things, two reactions from the other side. One, they're trying to screw me, right? Someone's hiding this or the buyer's moving the ball on the price or whatever for no reason. Or the second is, that's really concerning, but I'm going to call principal to principal, the other person, to get to the bottom of it. And it really breaks down very quickly into door A or door B. And door A is more legal fees, more chasing tails, more words in the document because trust is low. But door B is coming with an open mind saying, okay, things happen. This is bad news, whatever the thing is, right? And it's funny, you can see it. I've seen it many times, like a warped view of this. Of some people understand that, but then try to exploit it. So I had a client who had this very important item that they refused to disclose until like the last minute, basically hoping that the counterparty didn't notice the change in the documents, whatever. For a month, the attorneys are like, what's fraud? What is not fraud? What is our professional responsibilities? Like, we know about this thing. We know the counterparty wants to know. Believe it or not, that deal fell apart. They got it to 99%. So it's people, as much as we want to focus on the documents and the numbers, especially from your perspective, it's flawed human beings that get these deals done. And that relationship can, I don't want to say paper over, but address a lot of the substantive issues. Even if you don't like this person, and even if there's no contact after the closing, which is pretty rare, by the way, you kind of need to collaborate after the closing. You've got to build a strong human relationship there. Even if you think the person smells, whatever, you love the business, but you hate the person, you got to find a way, at least during that deal phase, to be on the same page, because you can that'll help you navigate these issues. The issues will come up. There is no smooth path. Sorry,
Well,
that was a
and
very long spiel.
well, no, because I think that part of it is that in these deals, when people go to kind of, everybody says prep to sell your company, so everybody's like, okay, well, I'm prepared to sell my company. None of these things are going to happen. When the reality is what you're touching on is the fact that a lot of deals right now are getting done owner to owner. So even if
Mhm.
there's like an entire team on each side, even if these are very big companies, when it comes down to it, the owner's going to be like, let me call the other owner. Let me have this conversation. Like, let me break bread and figure it out. But the other thing is that I've seen, like, how deals can go south is it is holding back something that they didn't think was a big deal. So it was like, well, we have this other investment
Yeah.
in another company, and that company maybe is a little bit of a competitor, but I don't feel like it's a competitor, and I'm just a minority interest investor. And you when it comes up, the conversation is typically from the business owner is like, well, that had nothing to do with this deal. That had nothing to do, and they don't need to know all of my personal business. So talk a little bit about, how like, even the fact, like, in the seller doesn't even believe that they're hiding information, right? They're
Mhm.
just like, that's not, we're talking about these businesses or this business that has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
And really sophisticated business owners have a lot of investments, and
Sure.
so they're just like, I mean, it's almost like they get defensive, even though they now seem like they were not telling the truth, right? But it's tangential. Like, that sort of mistrust and having those little inklings of mistrust is part of the problem that you're kind of alluding to.
Yeah. That's a great point. One of my biggest learnings, both operating businesses and participating in these deals, is what you think doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Because think about what you want in the world, whatever it is, make more money. That means you have to convince another person to pay you the money, right? For your product or for your service. What do you want your employees to perform better? Well, you got to understand what they're coming from, what their perspective is. What you think doesn't matter. It's what the people around you think matters. So you're trying to get a deal done. How do you get the deal done? Well, you get to yes yourself first, right? Like, I want to do it on these terms, no problem. But you're in control of that. What you're
Mhm.
not in control of is the other person's reaction, right, to what you do, etc. So you have to put yourself in other person's shoes and think it through from their perspective. So the threshold, if you find yourself in a deal, you go, am I required to disclose that? And you're reading the language with your lawyer and you're reading it. By the way, it's going to happen. Doesn't matter how honest you are. Like, you shouldn't, disclose things that you don't need to. And don't get me wrong, right? Like, obviously, that's an important part of the analysis. But if you're getting to the splitting of the hair, and it depends on what point in the deal you are and how material it is, there's lots of factors. Um, but if you just ask yourself a simple question, would the other party want to know this? Like, would that would they want to be informed? And what would their reaction be if they find out about it later? That's really should be your heuristic. And it sounds backwards that you would do things early in a deal phase or cycle that seem to threaten the deal the most, as in like disclosing something they think is scary, like wait till later when they're kind of convinced that they should do the deal. It's completely the opposite, because the possibility that you've blown up a ton of legal fees, Melissa, evaluation, all these fees and expenses and time and effort, the same disclosure on day one is a lot different on day 100 or 90 or 60 or 60, 90 days, generally speaking, right, from LOI to finish, even with financing. Then it gets worse. Whatever the thing is grows in size over time if it's known by you the whole time. You get to the last minute and you have a change of heart in something like you're discussing, Melissa, and you decide to disclose it. Like, that's a bombshell. It doesn't matter how small it started as. On day one,
Mhm.
you say, hey, here's some things I don't really know if they're related. Are you aware of? You can actually use that as a weapon later. So your example of a minority investment in a potentially competitor business, figured out whether it was a non-compete, etc. Still allowed in an M&A transaction, by the way, despite the recent rule changes, which may or may not hold up, but that's a different story. You disclose that on day one, I might skip it. and they remember it on day 99 or whatever it is at the end of the process, and you remind them, here's the email, I told you about this, kind of neutered that issue largely. You still have a problem with it, right? Later, but you've done your job. But this not disclose it, hold on to the secret until like you are going to explode. That doesn't end well most of the time.
Well, and part of it is, like when I started doing M&A 20 plus years ago when I was like young, right? We would we would wait until the buyers kind of came through for due diligence, right? And then we would have a bank of documents. But, I mean, I think part of it really comes down to you as even the professionals have to do the due diligence on your own client. Because again, it's not always that they're doing it on purpose, but they
Yep.
are, anything that they're even hiding from you, did you find it out? Part of where I think that you can avoid that is doing some of the due diligence up front and having all of that information ready before you even take the company to market so that you know what's going on. And then maybe negotiating some of those pieces like working capital or holdbacks for indemnifications, at the forefront would be helpful. But that's still, like you can disclose something, you can disclose your ownership in it. You don't have to give them all the information. It's very different
Sure.
in like a disclosure of something than, giving your past 18 years of personal tax returns or something like that. That's very different, right?
Yeah, 100%. Another piece of generic advice that I give, generic because it applies every single time, is you have to begin one of these cycles with the end in mind, which sounds like cliche or whatever, but it's very true. Because here's what happens. If you're not clear on your transaction goals, and you're going to say, oh man, this is easy, Alex. What are you talking about? I want to sell the thing for the most amount of money. You're crazy. This is easy, right? It gets complicated fast. And if you're not clear, and so the right advisor, legal M&A advisor, valuation, whatever, can walk you through some of these things from your perspective of the client, like hiding. Sometimes it's not willful, right? They're not being devious in any way. They just don't know what they don't know, right? So the right advisor is going to ask you up front, what are your goals? They don't ask you that, by the way, major miss. Because here's what will happen. The advisor can take that and remind you of your goals throughout the process, because is too complicated. There are too many things going on. What I see so often, the way we operate as M&A attorneys is you just lists. Everything's about a list, right? And so you make an issues list. You go, well, review the purchase agreement. Client, here's the 12 things we don't like about it. From them to some extent, right? They'll have issues. We'll put it all on one list. If you don't have your North Star, what you will do is you'll go down this list of 12 things and you will positionally bargain on each of the 12 in what ends up becoming an incoherent way. They'll respond, and we're going to start arguing over things that we actually don't care about. It goes so far to know, and it's hard to, by the way, decide, right? This is my minimum price, making up numbers, $10 million. I need $10 million in cash out of this business at the close. If I can get earnout on top of that, et cetera, that's gravy, but 10 million is the minimum, right? We talk about holdbacks or indemnification provisions, that 10 million's got to be out right in my pocket. That's my goal. Great. Now there's a rubric through which to sift through all these changes that are going to come from the other side. I'm talking about it from a seller perspective, right? But same for buyer. I don't want to spend more than this amount, or I would spend more than this amount if, that means earn out, right? People just, you lose the thread or the main point, the transaction goal. And then you end up you can make it more and more complicated because, numbers are easy. You say 7, I say 5, we settle at 6. Okay, that's just traditional positional bargaining. But better is, I don't care about this number because it's 7 or 6. The other one's 10 million. So I'm just going to give you on that point. Oh, you want 7, not 5, 5, whatever. I'm making up this conversation, right?
Right.
But I care about these other 3 things, and that's what I'm going to fight for. People think, oh, just fight on everything and like wear them down and drag it out. No, pick your battles, win them. There's a lot of, you'll appear magnanimous. This all needs to be genuine, by the way, right? To say, oh, I saw your issues list. We're good with 5 of the 7, but these are the ones that matter most to us. If you have your goals and you know what you're trying to achieve, you have the confidence to give them 5 things. And by the way, the list, it's not rank ordered, right? And there's not weight put on these things. It becomes very simple, even though it should be complex. I'll give you 5 and you give me 2, even if it's the 2 most important things. It's hard socially to be in that, like, oh, he just gave me 5 things. I'm going to say, I need 6 or 7 of the 7. So understanding your goals and holding on to it throughout is a way to avoid complication and increase, the probability of closing for sure.
And that's a lot of the, like there are a ton of negotiation tactics that we could talk about, and maybe at some other time we will. But part of this is also to understand, what is going to break the deal, what is going to make the deal. And in even looking at breaking the deal, inconsistent financials, like
Sure.
inconsistent operations. But one of the things that we've been talking to people recently, and I would love your take. So in the olden days, the owners or the private equity or whoever, like those are the deal guys, and then they get the investment bankers and the attorneys and everybody's involved. But when we're looking at some of these areas, the business owner has to be the expert and has to understand some of the stuff, right? Has to be aware of some of the financials, some of the operations. They're usually doing this whole deal. They're usually the, CEO and things like that. But one thing that is coming up, and it's probably because of the economics and environment, is people. People are becoming a very integral piece of. So before we'd be like, oh, you got a great owner, you got a great management team, this has been, track record of revenues. Well, now if you have 20 other employees or 30 or 40, I don't know what the threshold is, that actually could be of value, but it could also be a deal breaker if you're operating as if they're in the dark, right? I mean, and there's a million ways
Oh,
that we could
yeah.
go about dealing with this, but like people are becoming a really big thing. And in transactions in the past, yes, we always cared about people, but no, we really didn't always care about people, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in the small business context too, the definition of key employee is more expansive, right? Buying a business with thousands of employees or something, yeah, there are key people there, but there's a machine and there's momentum. 500 people aren't leaving the first day that you take over unless something really weird happened, right? It's just not going to happen. But in a small business, the right 2 or 3 people out of 20 is devastating. And so here's another thing. You talk about deal breakers. Here's one. You're going to break it before you even start. You have to understand that an M&A transaction increases risk. It shifts risk. It doesn't reduce it. And it actually increases it. This is a risky thing that you're doing on either side. I mean, the seller's shifting a lot of risk to the buyer, no matter how it's structured, right? Don't get me wrong. They're de-risking for sure. But overall, if you could measure risk on a scale of 1 to 10, it goes from 10 to 11. All the personal human relationships internally, to your point, employees, are changed. I've seen everything under the sun in terms of how the seller clues people into the transaction or not. I have always tried to be 100% transparent in my entrepreneurial things about what our goals are, whether or not the interests are aligned. Just to me, it helps sleep better at night. That's not always the wisest thing. So it's not blanket advice there, right? Or blanket experience share. I've seen people keep everyone in the dark until, the last minute. That's kind of scary for the buyer. I'd be worried from the buy side, but maybe they trust the seller's perspective. Then you can think about all the third parties around key customers. So a deal breaker, Melissa, is just not having the awareness, the first step, that you're increasing risk by doing the deal. The least risky thing to do is do nothing. I had a client fairly recently who, and sorry, from this risk perspective, you can't control the people. Doesn't forget about what the rules are, non-competes or whatever. You cannot control it. Nobody can. The seller can't control them. The seller doesn't have a claim on them working. They can walk out tomorrow. It doesn't matter what an employment no one can make you do anything. Sorry, spoiler alert. Very, very rare injunctive relief, right? Like that is the rules. And on the buy side, so I had a buyer who bought, identified the key employees. They were dealt in, if you will, locked in. Well, but the next level all left and started a competitor, the next week. Nothing you can do. Horrible outcome, but there's literally nothing anyone could have done. You could have, I guess, tried to contractually obligate everyone. It'd never work, would never fly. And they could just break the contract anyway and start the competitor, and you have to sue them. And 12 months later, maybe you get somewhere, but probably not. So you have to understand going into it what you're getting into, basically. And does that happen? Extremely rarely. I think I got one example in 10 years, right, of that happening, and it's such an extreme version. But for sure, from a buy side perspective, understanding the human is similar theme, right? Understanding the relationships, who really is key, both the seller's perspective, but I don't know, as a buyer, I'd be really hesitant to walk into a business when it's like first day at school, right? You have to some visibility there. There's only so many like checklist items you could check off in terms of key vendors, key customers or whatever. The internal beating heart matters too. And there's no solution there. If there's a lawyer who tells you, draft this agreement in such a way that, or some advisor says, it won't be a problem because it's a risk factor. You should be aware. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do the deal. Just you should be aware.
And I don't think people understand, but during this deal, everybody's paying attention. Everybody's paying attention to how you respond. Everybody's paying attention to how you react. Everybody's paying attention to the culture of when you tell your employees or what your employees know. And there are cultural changes and shifts that are happening that, more people are aware that the company's on the market. More
Agreed.
People are aware that something's going to happen. And now you brought it up. I know you don't want to probably talk about it, but like now we have at least a short time period where non-competes are no longer here. Who knows if that's going to last,
right?
But it impacts deals, valuations, what the company owns of their people. Before that would kind of, you'd have a non-compete and you're selling that non-compete with that person, so that's binding them in some capacity. And we don't have that right now. Does that impact? Is that a deal breaker? Or, what are some other ones that we're not even, because we're not trying to hit any of the big number ones. We're trying to hit, like, you think you got all the
hidden
money set aside, and going on, but even telling the employees, like there should be a process, and what does that look like? And if you don't have the right team to help you guide that, you just have, Joe Bob over here doing the deal. He doesn't care about the people, right? He doesn't, and that impacts, because if you're friends and you might be working for the company for a little bit longer, and you're creating some of this, they're paying attention. People are watching.
Yeah, I like the remaining relatives problem. You exit seller, but they're, siblings, cousins, offspring still work there. Like that's the recipe for disaster. That's not good. But yeah, that's the
I would look at it as like it's probably worth a lot more, because God only knows how much money is going to that family.
Well, it depends what side of the fence you're on, I suppose, right? From a buy side perspective, looking at the business, we're like, oh yeah, and then I'll employ, the son and the sister and the uncle and whatever. You're like, people are gonna like the changing of the guard. It's just a matter of time. That's like the advice on any earnout, right? Why would, from a sell side perspective, just ask yourself, if someone already bought the thing, why would they pay you more money? You're going to say, because they agreed to. I'm like, yeah, but why would you pay? You bought the car, you drove it off the lot, you paid in cash, and the dealership says, actually made a mistake, you owe us $3,000 more. You're going to go drive in the new car back to the dealership and give them $3,000 more? You're going to make them chase you a little bit, put them through their paces. I mean, you think you're going to play a game, and that's what happens, right, in earnout. So yeah, I think your kind of theme of you can prepare, but you can't prepare for everything, plus this theme of risk actually goes up. And then I tie it back to the right advisors are telling you these stories or these anecdotes and advising you, but they are not shaming you into a path. They are not the shushing librarian. They're saying, look, I've seen this 10 times. 8 times this worked. 2 times this didn't work. You want to do the 2 times thing, right? I will help you do that in the least silly way, stupid, whatever the right word is, possible. My experience is this path is better, but I'm here to support you to do this. Like, you are taking on all this risk, even the seller doing the deal, right? If there's earnout, there's contingent payments, there's indemnification provisions, the right advisor, no matter what the skill set is they're bringing, they're going to tell you those stories. This is my experience. Here's what I've seen before. And going to explain to you the issue so you're fully informed, but it's not going to decide for you.
Mm-hmm.
I see the principles you were saying, like owner to owner. That's who decides. That's who has the vote. That's who signs the consent that says, yes, we're going to do this transaction. Those are the real decision makers. I just see a lot. I get frustrated because when we're in deals, you'll see the counterparty client deferring to their counsel on points, not owning the decision themselves, but basically saying, well, my attorney says. Well, whose deal is this? Yours or the attorney's? Not that the advice isn't wrong, or I'm frustrated because, the advice is against what my client wants. Just that that's not the way it's supposed to work. You're the decision maker guy. You decide. If you want to rely on the advice, fine. But like, it gets gunked up. The advisors are not incentivized necessarily for the deal to close. They're incentivized to be risk averse and give the advice and, kind of not to close the deal necessarily. And some compensation models are different. At my firm, it is actually different. We do want to get the deal done. There's some alignment of interest there. But that can get really sideways really fast. And some of the hardest deals to close that I've been involved in is when the principal actually relinquishes responsibility to the experts or to the advisors, who kind of almost take over, but they aren't authorized to take up. It's a weird social dynamic. That can be a huge deal breaker.
And again, everybody's paying attention. You have a buyer that's basically like, this is like dating, so they're paying attention. Are you opening the door? Are you taking care of your employees? Are you, handling this business? Do you know what's happening? Are you of good character? And again, deals are in the past, I think, were just very much on money. Like, okay, I got that $10 million guy. If it's under 10 million, I'm not doing it. And now deals are kind of like, well, I thought I did say that, but I really like this buyer, or I really like this seller, and I really want these things. And it becomes a little different. Now, if we flip it around and say, okay, here are the deal breakers, how do we go back and give advice to these people and these business owners and say, hey, here's a deal maker. Like, here's how you're going to, structure the deal. Because a lot of times when we're negotiating the deal, we will build the business owner up and be like, you have to be saying certain things.
Right.
If you defer to me, then
Right.
I know you don't have that answer. Like, if you say, hey,
right.
Melissa,
Right.
could you handle, like, I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. That's literally you saying, I don't know what the answer is. But other than that, they're going to want to talk turkey. Like, the mob bosses are going to want to talk together. And like, how could you be more proactive? Like, what's the advice that you give to business owners to not have some of this stuff happen?
Yeah, I think, dating's not a bad, metaphor, right? But I just call it the steady drumbeat. You want to consistently set expectations and meet them. Good life advice, right? But just over and over and over again, methodically. So to go to the beginning, there's an LOI, and we say we're going to agree to something. You don't want to go back on what you agreed to in the LOI. It's not legally binding, etc. If you do want to go back on it, purchase price is the hardest one, by the way, to go back on. You got to have a dang good reason, right? So, hey, we discovered this in diligence, or even on the sell side, I discovered this in diligence through the QV process. We actually need more, and this is a material difference. Okay, if you got something to hang your hat on, fine, right? So the steady drumbeat, I think it's a good metaphor, right? So I'm going to sign this document on this day. I signed it on that day. We're going to turn you a draft of the purchase agreement by the end of the week. I don't care if it's 5:30 p.m. on Friday, but you sent it. There's no space when there's a steady drumbeat for doubt to creep in, or, hey, what's going on? Or we haven't heard from them. So this is, I don't know. I keep them on cadence, right? So set an expectation. Here's what's going to happen next. Here's what's my responsibility. Here's what's yours. And meeting the timeline, that goes a super long way. It's not at the same level of the whole, hey, something came up and are they trying to screw us, or is it a reasonable explanation? But when those timelines are expectations, these soft expectations, I'll get to you on Tuesday. You get to them on Thursday. there's space in there for, the gremlins to break up deals or whatever actually happens, right? But for there to be doubt and uncertainty, then overthinking. But when everything's happening according to plan, and these are all self-owned goals, right? If you say get it to them on Thursday, you could probably say Monday and be fine, right? So don't set the wrong expectation that you don't intend to meet, or everything's going to be really hard in the process on either side, because momentum will build. And if all of a sudden, again, despite your advisor saying, "Oh my gosh, everything's going perfectly," that means something must possibly, has to go wrong tomorrow, in your ear. But if you continue to hit these expectations, the steady drumbeat, everyone's confidence goes way up that things are going to continue to stay on the rails and there aren't going to be any surprises. And then you're going to close. Mm-hmm. But if we're doing this during the deal, I'll turn into the purchase agreement. No, you won't. Oh, the disclosure schedules will be here soon. No, they're not. Oh, just kidding. I sent you the wrong draft. All that stuff. You're doing this up to the last minute, and there's a possibility it keeps jiggling, for weeks, months past the closing date. So that's my generic. Imagine this, right? That we're just trying to build momentum here, and there's a very easy way to do it. Even if we're moving methodically, just don't alter the expectations if you can avoid doing so.
That is actually a really good analogy, because I think that I think that we as professionals, we operate in going, and then, at 5 or 6 or 7, we just drop it. And these business owners are like waiting, like everybody's waiting, like, okay, they said that they would do something. They said that they would send something, like they're going to respond, like they're waiting for the buyer's responses. They're waiting for the seller's responses. Yeah. So, I think that the consistency, I think, is, you also said, and you went fast through it, so people probably have no idea what you were actually mentioning, but you did mention quality of earnings. You called it COE. So that's what he was talking about. But quality of earnings is an interesting piece, because I think if like, we always want people to prep a little bit more for their numbers going into negotiation. Like, you shouldn't try to go get a $10 million deal on $100,000 EBITDA. And if that doesn't make sense to you in this conversation, give Alex or I a call and we'll help you out. But like the $10 million deal on $100,000 EBITDA means that you're going to have a retrade when they go through the quality of earnings. So what does that mean? That means you negotiated on a purchase price on financials that you thought were pretty good, I didn't clean them up like I should have, got a good accountant or got audited statements. I know everybody told me to do that, but I didn't do that. But now I have the buyer coming in and doing a quality of earnings, and they're testing your financials. And if those financials come back as not supportive of what you told them at the beginning, that could also create this, like, wait a second, your financials are not anywhere close to what they were when you talked to us about it. Yeah. So that again is setting the expectation that your numbers are correct. Your information is correct. You're supplying it in a reasonable manner. Even hesitation sometimes in a request for a specific document that might be in addition to normal due diligence, if it takes you a long time for that request and it's a normal request, it means you haven't been asked that. It means that nobody's gone down this far in the deal and it becomes evident, so there's other tells in the deal. But are there any, to kind of close it out a little bit, are there any other deal makers or things that you think a buyer could be, a seller could be proactive, a business owner, or even any of the supporting team, because a lot of times it's a lot of different players with a lot of different skill sets and experience in selling a company. And sometimes it's not always the consistent advice.
Yeah. There's a million ways you could take that question, right? I think, to your point, impressions matter and honesty matters. So in your scenario where it's like, hey, let's scramble and put this thing together, we didn't even know we needed it, just tell them you don't have it. Like, this is, like, again, it's counterintuitive. The question, I think, is one, you asked, deal makers, right? I'm going back to the breakers, but the inverse makes these deals, right? So it's counterintuitive. If we're on our first date, Melissa, right, you want to put the best foot forward. But actually, if your goal is like rest of your life, getting some of the warts out. You don't bring the list of like, here's the things you might not like about me. Here you go.
Mhm.
Right. But you do kind of want to not waste people's time and do
Mhm.
that sooner rather than later. So if you're sitting in a deal, especially as a seller, and go, man, when they figure that out, I wonder what they're going to do. If you're at the point where you've signed an LOI, maybe even too late, or you better start getting those unknown unknowns. I could go down the whole Donald Rumsfeld thing, right? Um, out there sooner rather than later. That builds credibility. So maybe in a deal maker lens, being honest about certain things. Hey, look, we didn't get IP protection on that. We didn't get it. Don't go try to figure out if you could file it next week and then they won't ever find out or whatever, right? They're going to see the dates. Just be honest about those things. So, yeah, if you're caught with your hand in the cookie jar, whatever other metaphor you want to use, being honest about it, like, this is what you're buying. This is what you're going to figure that out sooner or later. That's better than holding on to it, hoping they don't discover. And you actually build credibility.
Mhm.
Any buyer who thinks everything is spick and span is completely unrealistic. They're not going to buy it anyway, right? And so, but for your time waste, you're still holding the asset as a seller, right? You're still got to run the business, and you're trying to do this deal too. Congratulations, you have a second full-time job on top of the one you already have, right? You actually want it to be done. You want the quick no. The long maybe is the worst. The worst possible
Mhm.
outcome is you get 99% of the way there or 95% of the way there and it falls apart. So everyone wants to get the deal done. Don't get me wrong, but the fear of not getting it done shouldn't stop you from being, the straight shooter. Whatever, people are going to figure it out. If the buyer's going to be a good buyer, and they're going to figure those things out. So I don't know. A deal maker
Yeah.
is being forthright. What the? Here's all my dirty laundry ever, and here's this ex-girlfriend and whatever. No, not that. But don't, the things, again, put yourself in the other person's shoes. They're going to want to know about that. It's going to come up. I don't want to talk about this sexual harassment claim, right, that came to one of our key employees, but it's going to go in the disclosure schedules. It's going to come up. We might as well put it in front of them now. Later's worse. That
Mhm.
makes deals, actually. When people, again, that steady drum beat keeps going. And at the beginning, it's slower and it's farther apart, but then it gets faster and faster later. So
Yeah,
that's
it's
a
like
maker.
the confession brings people closer.
There you go.
But like if we still had our guy with a $10 million ask, right? And he had $100,000 EBITDA, even him being upfront with like, yeah, I have an incredible ask because I believe in this, or it's like, then it's like finding the unicorn buyer that also believes in the same dream. Is it a
Right.
projection? Are they
Right.
buying into the same dream? You could be a little crazy, but it's like you can't just show up and try to be perfect and then have it be completely wrong.
Yeah.
That's going to ruin it. And
If
you're
you're
not going to,
spending time
yeah.
if you're spending time in other person's shoes and you're understanding their motivations and they're matching, that's a good sign, right? But you have to spend that time. If you're
Mhm.
selling a model or the potential or the promise of the thing, and someone's buying the financials, to your point, right? And you sense that, there's going to be a breakdown here at some point. Maybe you skate through. Maybe, probably happens 10, 20% of the time, but unlikely. If they're not buying what you're selling rhetorically, or like from a feels perspective, it's unlikely to end up buying the actual thing later. So you have to make sure that you're on the same page there. And the only way to do that is to turn it around, right? And put yourself in their shoes. Say, when I talk about this story, they don't seem animated by it. They don't seem to get it. That's like your early warning system that you're not on the same page, right? And that quality of earnings might not go well, or, what have you. Something later
Mhm.
is going to pop up.
Yeah.
So I think you nailed that. Yeah.
Well, and I think that, you kind of closed it all in the fact that, we have seen a lot of deals be broken on an instinct, a gut instinct, but it was based on a pattern
Mm-hmm.
of inconsistency over the deal. So it gets to the point where it's like, yeah, I want the company, yeah, I want the deal, but the buyer is
Something's
just like,
off.
this is too much. I'm just like, you're not the only, even if you're a unicorn, you're not the only unicorn, and or this seems like a lot of work. Like, we see the red flags in the deal, and sometimes the red flags in the deal are going to make the buyer not want to actually finish the deal. And that's what we're concerned about. But well, I'm going to put some information about you, because maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how, because you do take a different approach to dealing with like you're informing the client on these things before, like you're prepping them for like, these are the things you're going to encounter if you go down this path. And we want to go down this other path, which is, disclosing documents, giving the truth, da 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 da. But in prepping your clients, like, what is your background? Like, how did you get into this? How can they reach out to you or work with you in doing a transaction or even considering selling their company?
Yeah, I mean, we work on both the buy and sell side. So I'm affiliated with a firm based in your backyard in St. Louis, but I'm here in Michigan, and there's my email address. Feel free to reach out. Yeah, we have a cool model. We're all attorneys that worked in big law in some way, shape, or form, and didn't like the culture and thought there was a more entrepreneurial way to practice law. So we work on a 100% commission basis. If you don't pay us, we don't eat. So we better deliver really good services. That's unique and different from the big law perspective, for sure. So you have a distinct disincentive to build the heck out of the book, the file, as we would call it, because you're not going to pay it. And then we're just wasting our time, right? Mm-hmm. So that is a really cool way to practice. It really unlocked it for me. I was kind of originally, kind of disillusioned with practicing law at one point in time, for sure. But that alignment of interests has really kind of brought me in line. And we love working with small and medium-sized businesses because it's about the people, not as much, no offense, about the numbers, right? Mm-hmm. More zeros doesn't make more, angels get their wings, but, more entrepreneurs selling their business and riding off into retirement and new entrepreneurs stepping in does, at least for us in our corner of the universe. So yeah, feel free to reach out for sure. Happy to help, happy just to take a call.
Do you want to talk anything about like startups and kind of the stuff that you can help, if somebody's more in the early stage, but maybe is more in tech or some other, complicated space, is that also something that they could reach out to you? Is that kind of in your space?
Yeah, I spend a lot of my time as a CEO of a software company. I'm an entrepreneur. I've had failed businesses. Hopefully this one's successful that I'm working on now. And you learn a lot through failure. So again, I think I'm a business person first and a lawyer second, which is a unique. I'm going to first look at your problem from the perspective, or your challenge or your issue, or whatever it is, or opportunity from the perspective of what if I was running the business, right? And then where does the law matter? I'm pretty famous for saying you don't need to spend time with me right now, or you don't want to pay me for this. This is easy. This is not going to alter. The axis of the earth is not going to tilt based on this decision. And when it's the right time, say that you need to spend some here on legal, right? Let's get this right. You should get this right. But yeah, we're pretty, again, because of the way that our compensation works, et cetera, it's not worth our time to do the beggar thy neighbor thing, right? Like we want long lasting relationships that are lucrative for everybody, which means long-term, right? And you wanting to talk to us, not you going, oh, he's going to bill me for this 10 minutes. I'm not going to bill you for the 10 minutes. It's not worth the time. It's not the way our structure works, right? I want to work on the big bad things with you when it matters. And I want to give you the advice when it doesn't, and see it be successful. So not that other attorneys don't feel those things. It's our model lends it to that being rational and nice, not just like a nice sentiment that's in conflict with, my desire or need to impress my partners or whatever by billing enough hours and like keeping my place in the firm. It's the way it works a lot of other places.
Well, and I think quite frankly, that's a lot of the deals that we get involved in is, we don't care if they finish the deal or don't. We want to make sure that it's the right deal for them. And I think that part of making a deal is getting the right team that doesn't just say yes to you, like that says, because a lot of times these business owners have been in a yes position for a long time. And a lot of people are just like, yep, however you want to do it. And in this situation, I encourage people to really hire somebody who's going to tell you the truth and is going to prepare you so that you don't mess up the deal yourself. Like that would be the great team, is they can identify certain of these things, because I was a novice on a lot of deals and saw them sometimes break whenever, the partners would do certain things. And I would just be like, oh my gosh, how did, we could have never known that. And then now looking back, there are a lot of things that you could know up front and that somebody could prep you for. So I appreciate
Yeah.
the conversation. And I think we'll probably talk more about some other of these types of more simple conversation, because it's not all about the money. Like
Right.
anybody can negotiate the money for you. It's still like the entire process is what we're talking about. But we appreciate your time. And if you want to talk about more deal stuff, then let us know.
Thanks.
All right. Talk to you soon.